And now, this.
Okay, let's go. Harry Tracy.
Harry Tracy! Trigger warning. The following contains the authentic accounts of factual historical figures and events. If historical information may upset you, then please withdraw now. Retreat.
Well, I guess you know who I am.
Harry Tracy is a true story. This telling is authored from sources spanning over 120 years. All characterized quotations are verbatim from interviews, newspaper articles, and testimonials taken at the time. Scott Martinez. Harry Tracy, Part 3. Utah. Prison Break. Harry Tracy, now a convict, would spend the summer of 1897 incarcerated in the new state of Utah.
Grover Cleveland signs presidential proclamation.
In 1896, Utah became a state.
January 4th, 1896, Utah Territory joins Union as 45th state.
Convict workers had completed the new state prison 6 years earlier.
Utah State Prison. 500 inmate capacity, 240 cells.
On 180 acres, surrounded by 19-foot-tall stone walls.
January 1896, George Endow becomes warden of the Utah State Prison.
And the prison promptly purchased industrial machines and began producing shoes, socks, and clothing, with a $4,000 profit recorded the first year.
Water for the prison at that time was pumped by hand from a nearby ditch into tanks located at the top of the buildings.
Difficult work that took the convicts outside the walls of the prison. Digging ditches to lay water pipe to Parley's Canyon was a primary assignment for the prisoners.
Country up in arms to capture Tracy.
Tracy engineered his first escape from prison, and in doing so, met his first partner in crime, David Lant.
With Lant, Frank Edwards, Harry Tracy, and W.H. Brown escaped from prison. When last seen soon after their escape, the men were in the vicinity of Park City and were making their way eastward.
The Portland Morning Oregonian printed on March 22nd Harry's statement regarding his reasoning for escaping from the Utah State Prison.
I left because they did not treat me right.
Convicts guilty of misconduct could be punished by the warden under regulations adopted by the Board of Corrections.
I was breaking rock.
All convicts except those in solitary confinement were required to work 8 hours a day, every day except on holidays and Sundays.
And the large hammer they gave me to use hurt my hands, which were very tender.
Humanitarian views of the Utah State Prison included mandatory work.
I asked for a smaller hammer and was refused.
In Utah, prisoner punishment was not as medieval. Punishment by cold water showers or bareback whippings were not allowed, as they would be routine in the Oregon State Penitentiary.
My hands were bleeding and sore. I declined to work.
As progressive a prison as Utah was,
George Endow, thorough disciplinarian yet a kind-hearted, merciful man.
It still employed disciplined cells for incorrigibles, dark holes in the basement.
They tied me up for 5 days, and I made up my mind to escape.
So Harry Tracy busted out of the Utah State Prison.
Utah State Prison?
With a piece of wood whittled into the shape of a gun.
Wooden gun, used to escape.
On October 8, 1897, Tracy was digging an irrigation ditch with 10 other inmates. Amongst them,
W.H. Brown, inmate number 909. Frank Edwards, inmate number 953. David Lant, number 952.
As a pretense to gain the attention of the officer overseeing the work detail, Tracy deliberately broke his shovel handle. When guard John Van Streeter came to inspect the broken shovel, he found Tracy with a gun.
Wooden gun!
One of the shovel strips, it stayed down, and an ugly six-shooter came up instead.
The gun Tracy used to escape was actually a whittled piece of wood wrapped in foil.
The escape was one of the most daring in the history of the penitentiary, being effected so quickly and quietly that very few outside the gang in which the men were at work knew anything about it,
declared the Salt Lake Tribune. Bluffing a guard with a wooden gun, the exact same tactic famously employed by the notorious gangster John Dillinger. Jefferson City Post-Tribune, May 9th, 1934.
Harry Tracy cut almost the exact same swath at the turn of the century that John Dillinger is cutting today, and there are so many parallels in their careers as to suggest how Dillinger may die.
March 17, 1895, Thomas Blank, held in Seattle, a multiple state murderer facing the death penalty, had also bluffed his way out of jail with a wooden gun. 7 years before Harry Tracy, Seattle was seized in a similar grip of fear and fascination by the outlaw Thomas Blank.
There is no question that he is a high roller. With him it is liberty and other men's money.
Real name, Michael Hogan Jr., also known as Crazy Mike, Slim Jim, and many other aliases. Thomas released 10 other prisoners when he duped the night jailer with his wooden gun. The replica of a .44 that Thomas Blank fashioned using a steel shank from his shoe was said to be so authentic looking as to fool anyone. The fake gun was later auctioned off in Port Townsend, fetching $6.50. Thomas garnered much the same public fascination, outrage, and appeal as Harry Tracy would 7 years later. 18,000 people arrived to view Thomas Blank's corpse when on display, including one woman who kissed the killer. Detective Edward Cudahy, who arrested Blank and was grazed in the neck by a bullet in the process, would later become Sheriff Edward Cudahy and lead the manhunt for Harry Tracy. But that would be in a few years, in Portland, in Seattle, and all around Washington State. After Tracy's violent breakout from the Oregon State Prison, his fourth and most bloody escape.
Well, I am Tracy.
But in his first prison break in Utah, Harry didn't shoot anyone with his wooden gun. Perhaps the best description of Harry Tracy and David Lance's escape and their ensuing flight from the Utah State Penitentiary, it is a poem penned in Tracy's own hand and given to Sheriff Charlie Neiman while Harry was incarcerated.
Echoing the outlaw poet Black Bart, Harry left behind Doggerel.
Doggerel, coarsely written boastful rhyme left behind to taunt the law.
He is out for notoriety and not at all for gain. He may arrest a schoolboy or pull a hobo from a train. We left the Salt Lake Pen as the sun was setting low, and we walked along the railroad tracks until our legs refused to go. But we struck Park City early when the morning sunbeams lit on our striped pantaloons where the happy parties sit. It's there that we took refuge in some jungles which stood there, and watched the brave policemen while around us they did tear. It's there that we ate our lunches and our weary limbs did rest, until the sun was sinking in the far and distant west. When we started on our journey for our home they call the Wall, where very few detectives ever dare to call. Yours with kind love and best wishes, Harry Tracy.
It was Harry Tracy who had enlisted or simply included David Lant in the escape from the Utah State Prison. Harry who had produced the gun.
Well, I am Tracy.
Harry Tracy is vicious and sullen, with a very forbidding face and looks the typical criminal.
Gentlemen, I am Tracy, and I want something to eat. Quick.
Tracy was now a convict, on the run, and far from home.
And I want you to tell me where all these roads go.
David Lant, however, was a well-known local.
David Lant does not look like a criminal.
The Vernal Express. David Barnabas Lant came from a prominent pioneer family with deep community ties.
David Lant is a boy born and raised here who has failed to accept the good advice from his father.
Mormon church records show David Lant's baptism at the age of 8 on December 7th, 1882.
Lant was raised in Payson, has given his relatives, who are good people, much sorrow.
And his mother dying on August 6th, 1888, when David was 13. As a youth, Lant would herd sheep at the John Reeder Ranch, where a ranch hand named Walt McCoy remembered,
David Lant, well, he was a good boxer. He used to mix it up with all the local ranch hands.
the Exchange Saloon. The year before, Lant had smashed a bottle across the head of owner James McNaughton. Co-proprietor William McCaslin shot at Lant 3 times, hitting him once.
David Lant, sheep herder, acknowledges self in wrong, put in his own language.
Oh, I went there to get in a row, and I got it. When Tracy and Lant made their break in Utah, Lant had done a single month of an 8-year prison sentence.
Lant broke into the Cook Brothers General Mercantile Store in Woodruff, August 19, 1897, stealing underclothes, shirts, shoes, hats, gloves, ties, and tie pins.
Warden George N. Dow offered a $50 bounty for each escaped convict and put together a 3-man posse that included himself and 2 prison guards. Why Harry Tracy, a man sentenced to a single year at his prison, would take such drastic action as to escape. Warden Dow declared,
Harry must have had a very grave crime lurking in his past.
Summit County gathered another 6-man posse and reportedly searched all night.
A lot of experience, but no convicts.
W.H. Brown and Frank Edwards were caught quickly.
Officers and citizens hunt the outlaws down.
Back in Vernal, horse thieving was now suddenly abundant.
6 horses stolen. They were taken from a schoolhouse where they had been ridden by school children.
Sheriff William Preece.
Sheriff Preece and 2 deputies were out all night Monday hunting for David Lant.
Struck the Atwood Ranch House, known friends to David Lant. David and Harry hid in the cellar.
I have not seen any such men.
The sheriff and posse raided 3 houses of friends of Lance, but were unable to find him.
Leaving the Vernal area, they stopped at another friend of David Lant's, Walt McCoy, who ran a sheep camp on Pot Creek. Tracy sent me down for some food. He's up there in the rocks, watching me, and I'd like to get away from him.
Just go back and tell him to stick his head up, and I'll kill the S.O.B.
Well, I'm afraid if I cross Tracy, he'd kill me. As escaped convicts, now newly anointed in the newspapers as desperados, dangerous and desperate men, Harry Tracy and David Lant headed for the Outlaw Trail.
The Outlaw Trail!
Arguably, it extends from Canada to Mexico, but the term primarily refers to a series of isolated and natural sanctuaries, outlaw hideouts, at the nexus of Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming.
Countless times the officers have pursued the desperados to this place, and bloody battles have ensued, in which outlaws and officers have given up their lives.
The rugged and remarkably diverse, unsettled land blurred the state borders, and official jurisdictions became hard to judge. A vast place with names like Hole in the Wall, Robber's Roost, Powder Springs, and Brown's Hole. Brown's Hole, an isolated mountain valley, is better known now as Brown's Park.
No single location in the West, and certainly none on the Outlaw Trail, has such a varied history as Brown's Park.
At the time Harry Tracy and David Lant arrived, so many outlaws were floating through the area that their numbers strained a long-standing relationship of tacit neutrality shared with the surrounding citizenry.
There had always been cattle thieves in that section. Stockmen marked off a certain percentage each year as an expected hazard of their business. But with so many rustlers concentrated in one area, herds of from 100 to 500 head were run off at a time. Thieves conducted regular roundups. In a short time, there was scarcely a steer left on the range.
The law comes to Brown's Hole. The cattlemen who stood for law and order had served warning on the outlaws that they would come in full strength, if necessary, to collect their stolen herds, killing any man who stood in their way. The wild bunch knew the ranchers like the Hoy brothers. They were not boasting.
David Lant and Harry Tracy would continue to make headlines. Together they would be captured and escape 2 more times.
News of the West!
And when cornered, Harry would shoot a prominent rancher named Valentine Hoy.
Trial of Lant and Tracy.
A killing so consequential it shaped the end of the Wild Bunch.
Governors to confer. Border outlaws the theme.
James Hoy, rancher, largest local real estate holder, and later member of the Wyoming Territorial Legislature. Desperados, who are now in New Mexico this winter, maybe in the wilds of Montana next winter, paying this section a visit on their way, terrorizing the people, robbing the camps, and stealing horses en route. They are migratory criminals.
Here today, there tomorrow, changing their names as they change their locality. Reward of $1,000 apiece, dead or alive, offered by the authorities of 3 states, Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah.
So if you watch that whole video, you're pretty cool.
The preceding was one part of a 9-part project. To watch the next part, click here. Or to view the entire Harry Tracy documentary, click here.
Well, that's just damn good news.